So today I would like to talk about which thyroid labs to get and which ones you really want to avoid. And so, this comes up a lot because a lot of people are seeing conventional practitioners who are just measuring a TSH, and then they go and they see a functional medicine practitioner who measures 7 different thyroid markers. And more is not always better. So I am a functional medicine and environmental medicine practitioner, but I'm light on labs. And so I do the labs that you need, but there's a lot that when I lecture to other practitioners, I tell them, if you lean too heavy on your labs, you're going to fall over, right? So there's so much that goes into the actual diagnosis or determining whether or not you have a particular cause. And you have to take into account what your history is, what your symptoms are, and they are much more important than your lab tests. But when it comes to looking at your thyroid labs, that is what we're going to talk about today. So let's take a look. So the first thing that is usually very common is TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. This is the one that you're going to get at the conventional physician's office more often. And it's looking at the message that's coming down from the brain to the thyroid. Okay, now when it's above a certain number, it's basically inversely proportional. It's different than what you would think when we're looking at thyroid. It's inversely proportional, which basically means that when the number is higher, it means that the thyroid is, or the brain is yelling at your thyroid to make more thyroid. Okay, and so then this means that your thyroid function or the thyroid hormones that you have are most likely going to be lower. Okay, so that is a marker of having low thyroid. TSH is above a particular number. Now, in conventional medicine, they're looking at around 4, but what I like to see is above 1.5. So between 0.5 and 1.5, that's ideal for TSH. So anything above 1.5 indicates that the brain is yelling at the thyroid to make more thyroid. Okay, so then you want to look at what's actually floating around in the blood, and you want to do this with the free fraction, so free T4 and free T3. So there are a number of different hormones that are made by thyroid. And the major ones are T1, T2, T3, T4, and T3 and T4 are really the ones that we measure. And you want to look at what's actually bioavailable. And so those are the free fractions, FREE, right? So free T4, free T3. Free T4, we want it to be above 1.2, generally 1.2 to 2.0. Free T3, we want it to be above 3.0, so generally 3.0 to 4.5, sometimes 5.0. Okay, so those are the ideal range, the optimal ranges, the functional range. So whenever we're talking about normal ranges, when you're looking at the lab test, it's actually a population-based range. So it's looking at everybody who's taken the lab test, and that it creates a bell curve, and it chops off the bottom 5th percentile and top 5th percentile. And you don't want to be average. You want to be optimal. And that's why you want these numbers to be where I'm saying that you should have them, as opposed to what it looks like in the lab test. And then, if you still have low thyroid symptoms, but your conventional practitioner says, hey, according to the lab, your thyroid's fine, like that's where the disconnect comes, and I'd say 95% of the people that we see aren't, and who have low thyroid symptoms or have been diagnosed with low thyroid, are being undertreated for thyroid. So we're going to talk about treatment more in a little bit. But you want to look at your symptoms. You want to combine that with the labs here. So those are the major tests that I would recommend. So the TSH, the free T3, and the free T4. Now, once you start taking thyroid hormones, start taking thyroid support, the TSH is going to be less helpful. So if your TSH is suppressed, it doesn't mean that you're on the road to osteoporosis and that you've got high thyroid. It's not what it means at all. Okay, so you just have to realize that, because that's sometimes what your conventional practitioner is going to say, or even your functional practitioner, unfortunately, sometimes. So you do want to take it all into account with your symptoms. And part of this is also because some of the other testing that you want to look at, or some of the other symptoms you want to look at, have to do with adrenal gland and mitochondrial function. So the adrenal gland is a little triangular gland, sits on top of the kidneys, is responsible for producing cortisol, which is our body's main anti-inflammatory. It regulates insulin, so it regulates blood sugars. Also is our get up and go hormone, helps to regulate our sleep-wake cycles. So it does a lot of different things, manages the immune system. So important. And it also helps to support thyroid. So sometimes the thyroid tests that I just mentioned, TSH, free T3, and free T4, may be off or may not be entirely accurate if your adrenals are not functioning properly and if your mitochondria are not functioning properly. Now, the mitochondria is responsible, they're found in every cell in the body except for red blood cells, and they're responsible for about 70 to 90% of our energy. And they help hormones to get inside the cells and just function better in general. So consequently, one of the things that we find is that before we go to give anybody any sort of thyroid support, we support their adrenals, we support their mitochondria, and presto changeo, the thyroid works better. And then we actually get different laboratory testing by not even changing what we're doing in terms of giving people thyroid support. And some of this, people's thyroid might be normal. So even with the ranges that I'm saying, you may be like, well, actually, I still have low thyroid symptoms, but my thyroid tests are normal. What does that mean? So that can oftentimes mean that the thyroid is compensating for low adrenal function. Okay, so thyroid is going to be boosting itself up artificially to compensate for the low adrenal function. Now, when you support the adrenals and you support mitochondria, like I talked about, all of a sudden you'll see that thyroid numbers actually come down and then they're more reflective of your symptoms. And this is because now the thyroid can relax because it's no longer trying to compensate for the low adrenals. Okay, because the hormones really try to support each other. Adrenals, thyroid, and sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, right? They're all this three-legged stool and they all need to be in the dance in order to be supporting each other, right? And the adrenals are really the sentinel gland. They're the most important one. And they actually have a section in there to produce sex hormones as we get older. And so you just have to kind of take that all into account. And so that's why relying on lab tests on their own is so is such a problem. Okay. And so what lab tests should you avoid? So there are people who would recommend that you get antibody testing to look and see whether or not you have Hashimoto's. Now, 90% of the time, low thyroid is caused by autoimmune thyroiditis or Hashimoto's. 90%, could be 95%. It's really high number. So most of the time, it's going to be due to that. There are some other causes like low iodine, I mean, those are kind of the big ones. I mean, there can be stuff that happens, from radiation or some of these other issues, but those are some of the dietarily related, some goitrogens or eating foods that are inhibiting with thyroid function. But most of the time, it's going to be autoimmunity. Okay, and so I don't recommend wasting your time on getting those lab tests. If you want them, great, but you just have to take them with that caveat. But it's not, I don't think it's worth your time. The other thing too is reverse T3. Now, reverse T3 is going to tell you whether or not there is some other stressor that is contributing to the autoimmunity. I used to order these tests, but I just found that they didn't bear fruit. They weren't very helpful over the long term. And so that reverse T3 is basically saying you've got some sort of toxin that's present that is causing this sort of dysfunction. Now, reverse T3 binds to the T3 sites. T3 increases metabolic rate, reverse T3 stops it. So it can also cause an increase in weight gain. And so, but what it's really telling you is that there are toxins present. Now, we know that because 90% of all the causes of low thyroid are going to be autoimmune. And what causes autoimmunity? Heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, allergies, negative emotional patterns, and electromagnetic fields. So all the toxicities that we talk about in our programs, right? So those are going to be present when you have autoimmunity. So consequently, your reverse T3 is going to be abnormal. It's basically just telling you there's inflammation, there's stress on the human organism. So you don't need that test, right? And those are the major ones that you might be considering. So just the TSH, the free T4, and the free T3 are going to be essential for helping you figure out, in the context of your symptoms, and then the other things that I mentioned, helping you figure out whether or not you have a thyroid issue. And if you still have thyroid symptoms, then it's time to make sure that you're being well supported in your thyroid, because everything works better when your thyroid is working better. Thyroid is amazing at lowering blood pressure, lowers cholesterol, supports the immune system, everything is better when thyroid is optimized. So it's definitely a big part of what we do in our program, a big part of what we call the big three, where we're supporting the adrenals, the mitochondria, and the thyroid. But you have to do it in that order. And then when you support the adrenals and the mitochondria, if you still have low thyroid symptoms, then you're going to want to take some supplements in order to be able to improve the thyroid function. And then if you need to take any sort of thyroid replacement, whether it's medication or in our program, everything that we do is natural, so it's glandulars, we do a subjective ramp up. So we get you up to your ideal dose of thyroid, because like I said, 95% of the people that we see who have low thyroid, who come to us, they are being underdosed in their thyroid. Okay. So hopefully that's helpful for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe so you don't miss any more of this great content moving forward. Have an amazing day. Drop me any questions below, and I'll see you in the next video. Many blessings.